of time in the last couple of months, really finalizing the system optimization plan. So we have some updates for you on the system optimization plan. We're not going to go through route by route, but those were sent in your packet. So if you have any questions, we'll try to answer those here today, and we may need to take those back to the rest of our team as well, but I'm happy to go through those. A very brief update on the fiscal and financial analysis that's been being conducted. And then we're going to spend a fair bit of time on the mobility plan for the future, where we're going to talk about what RTD looks like when we move into 2050, and then we'll talk about some next steps as well. Okay, just as a refresher, Reimagine RTD started out to answer the question, what's next for RTD? And here's some real specific things that we were asked to cover, and look at the fixed route bus service and make sure that we're getting the most out of the dollars spent and how the service is put on the ground. And then, it ranges all the way over to fleet electrification and evaluation of the boundaries, maintenance facilities, so a real wide range of things that we are looking at as part of Reimagine RTD. There are three primary deliverables. The first is the system optimization plan, and I just alluded to that, where we're looking at route by route, every service and line that is operated by RTD, kind of pulling it apart and putting it back together and making sure that it is doing the very best to serve the mobility needs and the travel patterns of the people of the region. Then there's a financial analysis looking over the long term. What do revenue projections look like? What do the cost projections look like? And how much capacity does RTD have in order to serve the growing demand in the region? And then the final one is the mobility plan for the future. This is putting us all the way out in 2050, putting our long range hats on and saying, we know that transportation is changing, and there's a lot of great emerging technologies that are coming into place. How do we make sure that RTD is well positioned to utilize some of those and to continue to be a competitive and useful piece of the mobility landscape in the region? And then over the top of all of that is the public engagement. And we have, led by Julie and the RTD outreach staff, they have put together a really tremendous and really broad spectrum of outreach activities for us. You can see here there's some stats. We've had, over the course of the project, we've had over 180 meetings with 4,000 attendees. We participated in over 30 telephone town halls, and we had listening sessions with staff, and we went to see just a ton of different groups and hear from them, sometimes virtually, sometimes in person. But we got a lot of terrific input to help provide feedback on the recommendations that came out of the project. So let's dig into the system optimization plan. The real goal here of pulling apart all of the lines and putting them back together again is to really to increase ridership and make sure that we're getting as much out of the service as we can, looking to improve efficiency, make sure we live within RTD's budget. And one of the things you'll see a couple of times here today is that we know that even pre-pandemic, as we looked at the services that RTD was operating, RTD was actually operating more service than they could financially sustain over time. So trying to make sure that we put services on the ground that RTD can continue to run and do that in a financially responsible manner. As we went into the pandemic, we realized we also needed to take into account those changing travel needs. The patterns weren't quite the same. The periods of time when people were moving weren't quite the same. So making sure we were taking that into account as well, remaining competitive, and of course, improving service quality. So through the public outreach process, which as you all know, we extended a month and received even more comments through that period. We received over 1,600 comments, very specifically geared towards the system optimization plan. A lot, and the spectrum of comments that we received was tremendous. So a lot of them were asking for better and more service. Several of them, a lot, started to talk about safety and security concerns. So, and then several also asked about more definition on the mobility on demand and the flex ride services. So you'll recall that we had left that sort of open. It still is sort of open, but we do have a bit more definition around that. Some of the comments are specifically addressed as part of Reimagine RTD, and we'll talk a little bit about those today. And some are not in the scope of Reimagine RTD, so we have assembled those and provided those to RTD. Some, for instance, would be around safety and security concerns at Union Station, which has been a real hot button issue as of late, and RTD is actively working on that. And so we have put those together and provided those to RTD so they can understand what we're hearing from the public with regard to some of those concerns. So I don't want to go through route by route the changes that were made to the system optimization plan as a result of all the input we received, but there was some really, really good fine tuning that happened on the system optimization plan based on the feedback we got. So just as a refresher to everyone, the routes in the system optimization plan fall into 4 new categories, and we refer to these as the travel market categories. And the idea here is that routes serve different purposes, right? So sometimes you have a route in place like the 16th Street Mall that is meant to connect the sort of the 2 ends of downtown. And that is really, but it's very focused on that localized area. So that falls under the community category down at the bottom. Then you have these core services that are really connecting your largest employment centers, your highest density housing. They require a lot of frequency, and they require service throughout the day because they just generate a ton of demand. And so those go into those make up your core routes, and that's sort of the backbone of your network there. And then within that, we have 2 others. We have Connect and Commuter. The Connect really makes those connections between the core services and other services, and the commuter services are very focused on those high workforce housing or workforce locations like downtown Denver, Denver International Airport. And so there's routes that are specifically put in place to get people to those work spots. So within the SOP, here's a list of the changes that were made to the system optimization plan. You can see we have, oopsie, I'm sorry about that. We have listed them here. I think there's 11 or so on here, and you can see the locations where services were changed. So, and I don't think we need to go through these, but I do think it's of interest to see that these are very specifically in response to comments, sometimes from local agencies provided us comments, and sometimes they were just a public comment. One of them that stands out to me is the 402 down here in Douglas County. We heard from the public, they said, this old route that you used to run RTD works better for us. We'd like you to modify this 402 to make this connection on the south end there. So we've made that modification to better serve the riders. So these next slides, we can just go through. These were in your packet, but again, give a shout if you have any specific question on these. We'll try and get them answered, but again, we might have to reach out. Julie, I do see that there's a couple comments in chat. Can you let me know if there's something we should be addressing?
Nothing yet, just recognizing Dea.
Oh, good. Yes, wonderful. Okay, so these are, now I do want to get over to, we're just going to sweep through these here. So
we do have a comment from Mr. Van Meter.
Great, fantastic. Mr. Van Meter?
Yeah, thanks. Just wanted to note that the graphics in our presentation yesterday and this morning, we discovered for the Route 52, yes, there was an error, and we're in the process of correcting that error. Just wanted folks to know and clear up any confusion. And that is that the modification isn't depicted in the graphic, but we're proposing for the system optimization plan that the Route 52 will operate as it does today along Ralston Road. And yes, so we're getting that corrected, and just wanted to clear up any potential confusion on that specific item.
Thank you so much, Bill. That's a good one. Yes, that one, we had some great feedback from the city of Arvada, and we're able to make some adjustments based on real specific feedback that they gave us on that between the 52 and the 72. And unfortunately, one of the graphics in here is incorrect, but yes, we are making that adjustment as they had recommended. Okay, so a couple of other things that I wanted to touch on here that I think are important. The mobility on demand and the flex ride. First, the flex ride zones that are in place today that RTD operates all remain in the system optimization plan. Those all continue to be operated in the system optimization plan. We also heard loud and clear from RTD's local agencies and their partner agencies that there's more interest in flex rides and mobility on demand at that local level. So initially, we had tried to kind of identify locations on a map that seemed like the most promising areas for mobility on demand, to grow those mobility on demand services. And when we took those out initially to the groups and put that out for public review, there was a lot of, well, but you need to move this over 2 blocks to catch this new development that's happening. Or, you missed this area. And what we realized from that is, we don't really have a need to limit to those zones. We don't need to do that. So RTD, we've taken away the map with the specific areas for new and expanded flex rides. I think those areas have a lot of potential still, but what RTD would like to do instead is to just work with the local agencies to understand where it's needed within your community, where you're hearing demand, where RTD is hearing demand. And then as money is available for this type of a program, we're looking at and evaluating a partnership program where RTD and the local agencies can come together and put some more mobility on demand, flex ride type service on the ground to support that. So I think that just provides a lot more flexibility to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the traveling public as we're hearing it, and be flexible as growth and change in land use is occurring as well. The other question that came up a fair bit was the ADA paratransit service. So back in 2020, when services were reduced by RTD in response to the pandemic, the board of directors did retain service to ADA service, their paratransit service, within the entire area that the previous 2021 or 2020 service had provided. So that area, the ADA boundary was bigger than what it would have been if it just responded to COVID changes in 2020. So retaining that. Now, there are things that our recommendation as part of the system optimization plan is to continue to retain that larger ADA boundary. Now, there are a couple things that could still yet increase the size even more. One would be new services outside that current grandfathered area that could increase the size of that 2019 boundary, which I think people would support if that happened, and you would have to do that by regulation anyway. And then if there were potential annexations that needed to be evaluated and how that might change what the boundary looks like as well. So, but all in all, like trying to hold and maintain that larger boundary area. And I think I saw, was there a hand, Julie?
We had a comment. Director Cook was just saying, thank you for discussing the 52.
Oh,
and
yes,
then, yes, Commissioner Maurer would like to ask a question.
Great.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Tammy Maurer with, City of Centennial, but I represent Arapahoe County as well. Just going back to the flex ride.
Mm-hmm.
And that's great that you got a lot of comments on that, because I know we were pretty interested in seeing if we could do something, add a little bit more to that. But one thing, and I don't know if other agencies have done this as well or looking at it, but we have taken a big step at looking at what do we need for transit needs in the general area, the Arapahoe County area. And so we are right now, the Arapahoe County, we're putting together a study to kind of look at that. And then the other thing is there's the Denver South. It's the business district, it's in that area. They're also looking at those things. So my question is, when you're moving forward to say, okay, what are we going to do about, this flex ride? How are we going to, what are we going to change? What are we going to assess? Whatever. Mm-hmm. Do you have a plan? Are you going to start doing something later this year, or what should we because I'm trying to coordinate all these moving pieces. And so I'm just looking to see, how do I get you into that piece?
Right. So there's, and Bill or Brian jump in here as well. There's a couple ways that this could sort of be initiated. One is that, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the partnership program that is being developed or bolstered, perhaps is a better word. One is through the partnership program. And I think the idea, RTD, would be towards the fall of this year. We may be ready. You might be ready to take on a first call for projects. Is that accurate? Is Brian out there?
Yeah, I'm here, Holly.
Okay, wonderful. Fall of this year, ready for a first call is the hope, although we haven't lined out all the details yet.
Probably what's most interesting to the elected officials is what we're going to do is ask the board of directors as part of the 2023 budget to actually identify a specific funding source, which we don't have anything in our budget right now that articulates the level of spending above that, which we currently do. People are aware we probably have 12 and a half at least arrangements right now all over the district that provide funding for fair buy-ups and supplemental services and other types of things that are in addition to what we would pay for 100% ourselves. So what we're going to do is, if the board concurs, we will have a dedicated funding stream for the next 5 years. We would hope that would provide a pool of money that would be allocated based upon, I know, Holly, you're going to talk about that more later, but the answer to Councilmember Maurer's question is yes. We've got something that we're getting ready. We will hope to roll it out later this year and have it implemented and operational. We will be reaching out to stakeholders too to get your comments before we have the board take final action. Thanks.
Yeah, that's great. And then the other way that this happens is that the service development group at RTD, so that I would say that would be more local agency initiated. So if you as an organization, if you all as an organization have found that you'd really like to have an additional flex route in a particular location, that would be how you'd approach RTD to see if you could, through that partnership program that is being worked on. The other way that it could happen is that the service development group within RTD could be looking at an area that they see has a need. There is a need for service here, but it is not well met with a fixed route, an expensive fixed route service, because there's just not enough demand to cover the demand that way. They could recommend implementation of that kind of service as well from that angle, and that happens. They evaluate all the routes and how changes to the demographics have changed, how ridership has changed 3 times a year, and they'll continue to do that for RTD moving forward. So if they identify a need from that perspective, it could be initiated that way as well.
Okay.
Bill, I see.
Thank you.
Sorry, go.
Just to add to Holly's response, I think one thing to note, and Holly is going to touch on this, I think, in a future slide, but we are currently in the process of evaluating and hopefully implementing soon sub-regional service councils, and we do think that that's going to be a great place for dialogue directly about exactly what you're talking about, Tammy, in terms of that we would have conversations with jurisdictions about their plans that they're doing, looking at that, and that the hope with those groups is that we have that dialogue, and it's an ongoing dialogue about how things can change, and we can inform you about where we're at resource-wise, and then you can inform us about where things are happening and where your plans are, so that we can have better communication and coordination on the service side.
Yeah, it sounds exactly what we need, because it's moving. And today I can tell you this, but I don't know what but it'll be a different story maybe in 10 months. So yeah, that's terrific. That's very helpful.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's talk about the service sectors a little bit. You'll recall that as we were developing and evaluating the system optimization plan, as we were seeking input, we went out to you all and to the technical working group, and they invited people from other pieces of their jurisdictions and their agencies as well. And these are subtle grades of shades of gray on here, but you can see that these service counts one is Boulder. This lighter gray here is what we call the Northwest area. It's sort of subtle over here, but this is the Northeast area, the Southeast area, and then this whole section here, Jefferson, is the Southwest area. And the reason we did that is just for what you two were both just talking about, is that, you know, obviously the needs in each of these areas is a little bit different, and it's hard to talk about the entire system and 100 routes with everyone at the table and have any meaningful discussion. So breaking it into smaller travel shed areas is helpful to dig into some of those more localized needs. And so we also have evaluated the system optimization plan based on how it responds to each of these service sectors. So I wanted to share this with you. There's a lot of data here, so I'm going to try and just pull out a couple of high points. And there's two different sheets of this analysis. So first, we looked at the population in each of the service sectors, and right below that, we looked at the equity zone population. And these are important. One, we're trying to make sure that we have service spread across the region. That's sort of the top, so we understand population across the service sectors. And on the bottom, one of RTD's highest priorities is making sure that they're serving that social equity population group. So we want to make sure that we understand where those people live and where they work, of course. So in the middle column there, we have the bus service hours per capita. So the blue lines represent what was on the ground by service sector. The blue lines represent what was in the ground in 2021. And the red line represents what is on the ground in each of those service sectors for the system optimization plan. So this is bus service hours per capita. So what you see here is that Boulder and the Northeast area tend to, on a per capita basis, get a bit more service than the other three areas. And this is historically, this is how the travel sheds, this is partly due to how the travel sheds work and where people are located. So that's what you see there. Now, moving down, one of the things that we're interested in is how those bus service hours on a per capita basis are serving social equity to social equity populations. And so we see that, again, blue line being what was on the ground in 2021, and the red line being what the SOP accomplishes. You can see that the SOP does a great job of bolstering the service hours to those social equity populations. So not only is everyone in each of the regions getting more service, but our social equity populations are also getting more service in each of the zones. Then we move to the far right column here, and this is where we start to talk about access. How much access do we have, and do we have access to that really high quality service? So on the left side, again, the two bars that are stacked on the left represent what was on the ground in 2021 and what the SOP accomplishes when we put that in place. So you can see access to all stops is the red, the more solid red color. And 15-minute access to 15-minute stops is in the dark blue. And the SOP largely holds or in all cases increases people's access to that 15-minute or better service. And that was, again, one of the things that we said. We want to go in with make sure that those services are focused on providing that high quality backbone so we can really attract people to the service and provide them good service. But we do not want to sacrifice our access to our social equity populations when we do this. So access to the social equity populations, again, being very important to the district. So on the bottom right graph, what we're looking at is access to 15-minute or better service for social equity groups. And what we see is that in addition to providing better service to the whole, better 15-minute service to all of the population, we see that the system optimization plan increases that access to 15-minute or better service for social equity populations in all service sectors as well. So hopefully that helps. I feel like it's a lot of bars and lines and charts, but all of that to say the system optimization plan on a whole across the region does a better job providing access to the region. I think I see a hand. Audrey?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I guess I'm going back to the local service councils now that in the chat there's been a little bit more information that has been shared. I understand that it's going before the finance committee this month, so we can see what additional information can be provided there. In looking at the sequencing of when these councils will actually get up and running, which it sounds like will be later this fall, that really is a delay in the ability to provide input to the, service changes 3 times a year. Recognizing that getting them set up is about six to 9 months away, it sounds like, and how far in advance that RTD evaluates their services 3 times a year. We're looking at probably roughly a year before we're actually in a good sequence and cadence between service changes and the service council is actually being up and running. So can you address the sequencing and timing question? Thank you. Oh, and then I did just want to clarify one point regarding the comment about Boulder getting a lot of service. I just wanted to make sure everybody knows that the city of Boulder buys up service. They have done so for decades in order to operate higher frequency of service. And in addition, they have thousands of eco passes in the community between the city of Boulder, the business pass, and the neighborhood eco pass. So those are the justifications as to why the community has more investment perhaps in transit due to those priorities for their community. Thank you.
Bill, I think that we've had some conversations about how the service sectors, service council, and the timing of that and what its role will be with that 3 times a year, but I don't think that I'm the person to answer that. Can you help out?
Yes. Again, Bill Saroy with planning. We had just as a matter of, just for everybody's understanding, we had a work group made up of representatives from each of the counties, as well as some of the nonprofit organizations and TMAs that provided input to us over a series of a few months. The last started in February and we just ended last month. But one of the revelations that group came up with was the fact that the service councils are going to be set up so they're not specifically tied to the run board process. In other words, the expectation is that they'll meet, 3 or 4 times a year, but the decision about meeting in January won't be tied to the May run board. It's the idea that it's an ongoing dialogue between RTD staff and service planning staff and local jurisdictions about needs, about their plans, about development, and that we can keep informed. Because I think where we're at right now is, as we've seen, we've had over the last few run boards, haven't had a lot of ability to add service because of our operator issue. And so the expectation is that these groups will have that dialogue, and that it may be 2 or 3 or 4 run boards down the road where some of those changes can be made based on resources available, which is the big question that we have and our big challenge right now from a workforce standpoint. And that's what's driving a lot of our service changes is our workforce. And just also to update everybody, I think certainly since the last time we met, we did sign a new CBA with our union at the end of March, and we're very hopeful that we start to see some positive impact from that, in terms of class sizes and operators coming on board. So that's, again, hopefully a good sign, and we'll start seeing the fruits of that, a little bit down the line. It's not going to be immediate. And those of you who are participating in the September run board process, which we've had some meetings in this past week, know that there's not a lot of changes there because we haven't seen that, again, uptick yet on the operator side. So that's a little bit more on the background of how the process is expected to work.
Audrey, did that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, good. I see another hand up. Kathy?
Yes, good morning. Hi, Kathy Henson, Thornton City Council. Regarding the equity piece here, as part of the Northeast sector, we're the third largest equity population, and I'm a little concerned about the access to stops, just thinking ahead to the future, because Adams County is such a rapidly growing county, and Thornton in particular, we're anticipating, rapid increase in population over the next couple decades as we continue to build out our footprint, but also all across the Northeast sector. So just wanted to highlight that I have a little bit of a concern about those numbers, especially moving forward as we continue to grow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. And I think there's a couple other communities that have expressed just making sure that RTD is keeping their eye on the ever-changing demographic. And I think there's a real opportunity to continue to do that through that 3 times a year, making sure that we, and, the census data, of course, doesn't get updated as often as we would like it, but, trying to keep your eye continually on that data collection and understanding those changes and adjusting as needed to address the changing travel market.
Yes, and also just one more point to highlight, the Adams County Regional Economic Development State of the Region yesterday, they did highlight that this area also has some of the most affordable housing prices across the metro area. So that's definitely going to put us in a place to not only be increasing population, but possibly looking at higher equity populations as the region continues to grow.
Yep. Yeah. Okay, great.
Holly, we also had a question in the chat from Jill Lokentor. Would it be possible to get this data specifically for the city and county of Denver? Hard to tell how Denver specifically will be affected by the way the geography is split up.
Yeah. Let me just think about that. We have just downtown Denver called out as a separate, you can see the downtown Denver and sort of the footnote of each of them. I'm a little hesitant. I think we could do this, but if we start to, people won't really travel. Part of the reason that service sectors were identified the way they are is to identify how people largely travel and make sure that we're addressing that. People don't really know when they move in and out of the city and county of Denver, like maybe people on this call, because we think of in that manner, but most people that are out there don't really travel by a jurisdictional boundary. So I'm a little bit hesitant to start to break it down by any particular city, is that's pretty unusual to make a travel pattern that is based on a city boundary. I don't know, Bill or Brian, do you have any thoughts on that?
This is Jill. I can jump in there, and I get it. There's 50 some municipalities in the Denver region, and you don't want to do it city by city, but Denver is the central city, the largest city, the densest city. And selfishly, I personally would like to understand how it's affecting the city that is my primary focus of interest. So if that's possible, I would really appreciate that.
Yes. Okay.
So what we can offer is like we can evaluate that, but I would agree with Holly that it's not our preference to kind of give individual jurisdiction data. A lot of it, because a lot of this is based on travel markets, and so we'll go and maybe noodle on that a little bit and get back to you specifically.
Yeah, let's do that. Okay, one other thing that I wanted to share about some of this data and the analysis we did on the system optimization plan, because of course our goal is to make sure that when we make these recommendations on the system optimization plan, that we have in fact set out what we accomplished what we set out to do, and that's making sure that we're providing better service in the region, and that it's more reliable, and that you have access to that 15-minute or better core service as well. One of the questions that's come up a fair bit is making sure that we are providing access to jobs, and that the jobs in particular, people have asked us about lower wage jobs. And so you'll recall that one of the things we did early on in the process was look at the location-based services data, which is them tracking us by our cell phone and watching everywhere we go. And then we tied that to census and demographic data to understand, people who live in these 5 areas may be considered social equity in our social equity groups. So we looked at how are they traveling and where are they going, and recommendations that we made in the system optimization plan specifically tied that location-based services information and where people were going to jobs. I mean, it's the craziest thing that data tells us. It knows where you live and it makes estimates on where you work based on how long your cell phone stays in that location versus you going to shop at the mall or going to the grocery store. So we were able to get a lot of great data out of that. We did make recommendations specifically in the SOP that reflect that. And then we pulled some data also from the DRCOG socioeconomic data that's reflected here. So here you can see the white bar is the jobs in each of the service sectors. The lines are the percentages of those jobs served in each of the areas. And what we're looking for here is that we want that SOP again to hold or grow, specifically in that 15-minute or better access to jobs is what we want to see. And down here on the bottom chart, we have pulled specifically from the DRCOG data, production and retail jobs that are typically considered to be some of the lower wage jobs. And we wanted to make sure that we were, again, providing that really good service, 15-minute or better service to those jobs. And you can see that the red dashed line here takes a good jump over that peach colored dashed line. So we have provided, really increased the high quality service to those lower wage jobs throughout each of the service sectors that we've identified here. So I feel like that all of that to just share with you that the SOP really was able to accomplish. You gave us some direction on what you felt was important for it to accomplish in the region, and I think it's done a good job of hitting some of those key metrics. So I wanted to.
Oh, I'm sorry. We just have another quick question and chat from Audrey. She's asking if we have any updates on ridership since January of this year.
Yes, we actually, Bill, can you help us out there? We got some yesterday. I don't know if Fred's on the line today, but we did talk about gas prices having an influence and some growth on the rail lines, less so on the bus lines, but I don't know if we got any actual numbers.
Yeah, I don't have any numbers specifically, but I know in talking to some of our service planners that we have seen an uptick. It's not, huge uptick, but again, it's going in the right direction. And, as we continue to have these high gas prices, that's going to be a driver of ridership. So again, not that I'm crossing our fingers for high gas prices, but again, it does benefit us on the transit side. And so I think we can dig into those numbers a little bit. Usually there's a little bit of a lag in terms of us ability to report specific numbers, but I know anecdotally we have seen an uptick recently.
Okay, so the next topic that we wanted to touch on, and this is both in that system optimization plan and relevant to that, but also for the mobility plan for the future, is partnerships. Loud and clear. I think every meeting we've had, we've talked about the need for bolstering and providing just better information about how do partnerships come to be with RTD. And we have one that we want, and what do we do, RTD? We don't know how to get that in place. So we're actively working on updating and bolstering the partnership program. The draft recommendations right now, and I'll just caution you that as you see recommendations that we're going to show you throughout this the PowerPoint slides from now forward, there are recommendations in here that are from the team. They came from input from you all and from the public. They have not gone to the RTD Board of Directors. So they are in no way are they a final, this is getting put in place, but this is our starting point for having the conversation. And that's why we're hoping to get feedback from you today. So bolstering that and updating that partnership program, draft recommendations right now include an annual call for projects that would act like a grant program of sorts. And then RTD would do an evaluation and a notice of award annually. It would be on a schedule so that people would know when are we hearing back from RTD? Are we going to be able to move forward from this? And that RTD then continues to provide that technical expertise to help people get their whatever they've applied for on the ground. Some agencies may have staff available that are going to be able to do that more handily. Some are going to be a little green and maybe they've not really worked in putting some of these services on the ground. So RTD will also act as a technical resource through that process. Brian mentioned that we are going to ask the board to identify some funding to allocate to this program, and that would be something that the board would do annually. So I think that could be a pretty exciting way to get some amount of money, and maybe as if we're able to secure some higher funding sources for RTD, maybe even grow what's available to that pot as well over time. And then we started to put together a scoring rubric for how the grants would be scored, so that each of the agencies and applicants could understand what RTD is looking for. Again, this is just a draft. It's based on the guiding principles that have been developed. So we're talking about mobility and equity, and that it's a financially responsible investment to make. Using equity as an example, on the left side, we talk about what it means to really fully support RTD's goals around equity. So the project that focuses on serving Title VI populations and equity populations group would score well in that particular category. And then one that maybe serves more non-Title VI and equity groups would have a lesser score. That's not to say it could not still be funded, but in that particular category, it would have a lower score under equity. Again, just drafts, and if people have feedback on that, we'd love to hear it. So wrapping up the
I did have one question, just if we go back to that previous slide.
Yes.
So the one about employee morale, the workforce.
Yeah.
Maybe just if you could explain that a little bit. I mean, listen, I just can understand that, if there's if somehow there's a provider out there that's part of the partnership and they're providing a service at a lower cost, whatever, higher quality, that RTD staff may be hurt by that. But it just doesn't feel like it rises to the level of these other much more service standard characteristics. So I guess I wonder why that would necessarily be something that we should measure.
Right. So I can tell you some initial thoughts, and again, let's keep the feedback coming. If there's a better way to do this, I'd love to hear it. So workforce in particular here, what this is actually trying to focus on is that if RTD's workforce is going to be asked to operate, so in this case, potentially, in a lot of these cases, if RTD's workforce would be asked to operate the services in many cases, because they are the operator of services and they train the operators. And so that is generally the easiest way to get service on the ground, is for RTD to operate the services. And likely this could change. I mean, and there are examples of that for sure. So one thing we know from talking to the operators, there is a discussion about, oh yeah, I drove that for 2 years and I don't think I ever picked anyone up from here to here. And that kind of, if it's not a quality service that's providing meaningful connections in the community, the job starts to feel less of merit, because they're just driving around without really accomplishing what they're out to accomplish, and that's to connect people and provide them rides to places. So the idea here is that it is a good service that they can be proud that they operate. When they go home at night, they feel like they have accomplished and contributed to the community, is the intent there.
So I'll just, Holly, I love the way you describe that, but I'll just offer that it feels like there's other ways to measure that are more numeric and fit with sort of just an understanding of the character of a route and its utility as a provider of service. So just my own input.
Yep, I absolutely appreciate that. And I actually, as we get into mobility plans for the future, there is a section on workforce where we can dig in a little bit there. And this may not be, this particular scoring rubric with that, maybe workforce doesn't belong here. That could absolutely be, it's not set in stone. So I appreciate that feedback.
Cool, thanks, Holly.
Director Deschelle?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to comment, and John, I think Holly definitely hit the nail on the head, which is, our ability to provide strong service, our ability to be good partners is limited by our workforce. And I think that that's long been a left out component when we're thinking about building out our system and providing top level service. And so, it's whether developments are doing non-TOD or not, right? Our drivers, our operators, our frontline employees, we still have to fulfill that need. And so, making sure that can we actually backfill this? Can we make sure we don't end up in a spot again where we're demanding 6-7 day overtime for a rider or for our operators is there? And so I think, that workforce component, I hear you that, it might not typically fit with the way other people are thinking, but that workforce component is critical because without it, we're sort of operating under the assumption that we'll be able to provide the workforce no matter what, when in reality, we know that our service is largely limited by our ability to fill those vacancies. We can see them they're in that board briefing documents every single month, the number of vacancies that we have. So yes, there's money problems, there's partnership problems, there's a huge workforce solution. If we can turn the key on that workforce area, I think we can really open up the floodgates in terms of our ability to provide better service.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just offer that's a reasonable statement of it. And I think maybe there's a better way to articulate it. It might be something about, is this feasibly supported by, our goals for how the workforce should operate efficiently. I mean, split service is, that we all recognize, is not an efficient and appropriate way to manage the workforce. So I think just maybe it's in a way you articulate it in my mind, but because I think the way it was just explained, it was helpful. So thanks.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Thank you. We'll work on that. Okay, so for the wrapping up of the SOP, our expectation goal, we have to set some goals for ourselves so we can get her done. Releasing it on June 1st, and we'll have it will be online, and all the recommendations and changes from the draft will be included in there. We'll have a study session with the RTD Board of Directors in June, and then mid-July it goes to the Finance and Planning Committee. And then July 26th, the idea is for the board to consider and hopefully adopt that final SOP at that time. All right. So once that gets put into place, go ahead, John.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Just figured
no,
it's camera.
This is what we're here for.
So I will say this, just one, since we're getting to the end of the SOP, one thing that I think would be helpful, and maybe you see it in your own work on both the optimization and the vision, the future vision, but I would say that for somebody who's followed this process, I'm not so clear on how the SOP ties to where we're trying to get to with the vision. And you would think that, we're putting so much effort into designing and thinking thoughtfully through the future vision, that we would demonstrate some commitment to it through this SOP as a stepping stone. So I don't know if there's some way you could draw the parallels either in a closing statement or some sort of metric tie, but I think that's important to demonstrate, well, hey, this SOP isn't just sitting out there for a number of years operating, you know, in a vacuum. It does tie to all of this work we're doing around the vision. So that's just an overall comment.
Right. I wonder if we could, and I don't have anything, you know, glorious and pithy for you right at this moment, but I appreciate what you're saying. I wonder if maybe we could tie some of those, the earlier charts that I showed, where we talk about, like, one of the things that it's really trying to be thoughtful about providing service to social equity populations and providing better coverage on that 15-minute or better service. I mean, that is like, so those are some of the real fundamental things that you put in place here, and those continue to. Now, how you exactly do that may look a little different. You're in 2050, right? You may be having autonomous buses by that point, but the intent is that you're adjusting the services that you have on the ground today to set the framework for that and carry that forward. And I wonder if we could use some of those metrics to help with that tie and create that sort of basis. Would that be useful?
Yeah, I think it would be. I mean, I don't have it off the top of my head either, but it seems like we've been operating in two different universes. And I think dovetailing them and demonstrating would provide some confidence that folks that the SOP isn't just you know, a stopgap that without some sort of tie to a broader vision.
Okay. Yep, I'll work on that.
Thanks.
Okay. Of course, and then being working within your fiscal constraint. That's the other big one that comes out of it. I know. That is sort of how I feel about it. I'm like, oh yeah. It's so much less fun. Director Davidson.
Yeah, thanks, Holly. And John, thanks for that point. I did want to make the comment that that's one of the reasons that the board collectively had asked to extend out the scope of work. And when we do have that study session, I know that part of the plan for that discussion is to look at these together. And I appreciate the request to, you know, perhaps tie in some of the data, but I think your comment is a good one and well received, that it has felt, you know, maybe like two different universes here. And I know that at the last Finance and Planning Committee meeting, we had a lengthy discussion after the update, primarily focused around the SOP, that did blend into, you know, how we consider its intersection with the mobility plan for the future. So I believe that study session, a lot of board members are going to have a lot to weigh as we look at those two together. And that was one of the reasons that I and several of my colleagues I know were interested to consider this a little bit more holistically. So anyway, thank you for the comment, and certainly encourage folks to, I know they're late and they can go lengthy, but encourage folks to listen in on that study session. Thank you.
Fantastic. Hello, I see someone from the ATU, and I apologize, I don't know your name.
Good morning. This is Ron Short, Vice President, ATU 1001.
Ron, thank you.
I wanted to make a quick comment. I'm wondering, has the contracted work or private carrier work been at all reanalyzed? I know it was enacted by legislature years ago, but I'm just wondering, because it's so many variables affecting that at this point, as far as gaining workers. I feel like all RTD work would be more beneficial underneath one umbrella as far as workers are considered, because right now it's just constant competition between RTD and the private carriers, and neither one of them are able to gain a substantial amount of workers. So I'm wondering if that has been looked at as being viable at all in any way, shape, or form in today's standards, and is something along the lines of changing that dynamic has been looked at or could be looked at.
as part of Reimagine RTD, we have not considered that either direction, going fully to RTD or fully out to contracted. But I can absolutely appreciate that it is just competing against each other in a time when competition is not our friend right now, you know, in order to make sure that there are enough operators out there. Bill, has there been any dialogue at the, you know, within RTD about that?
I'm not aware of it, but certainly, I don't know, I can look to Bill or somebody else who may have been, if it's been elevated to the leadership team or, you know, specifically with bus ops and service development. I have not heard of anything specific to that, but Bill or Brian, I don't know if you guys have heard anything.
This is Bill Van Meter. Yeah, I'll plead ignorance on that topic as well. And, you know, it's something we're very aware of and always track. It's a standard set by the legislature and something that we have to live within. I'm not aware at a leadership level, team level, I'm not involved in all of those discussions, anything along those lines being talked about.
Yeah, because those standards were set years ago based on whatever variables that they had going. And like I said, right now, there are a lot of variables in place determining whether service can increase, RTD operators as well as contract services. And so you're trying to fit and balance a whole multitude of things. And then my thoughts is, you know, at least there should be some discussion and dialogue on bringing everything together so you have one entity to focus on instead of several others in and outside the company.
Noted. Thank you. Great.
I think that's actually a great transition. Let's go into our mobility plan for the future. So there's an area in there where we're making some recommendations that are pretty specific to workforce. And I think if amenable, I'd love to see us add one to address that in particular. Ron, so let's just dive in here. First, a little bit of background. We need to talk about the fiscal and financial overview. And I know that people want information on this, but I'm going to caution that we don't have all the numbers yet, but I'm going to give you a flavor of what we're seeing on the fiscal and financial analysis. So you'll remember that this next deliverable, the mobility plan for the future, we're looking out to 2050, and a piece of that is the financial analysis, both an evaluation of how RTD conducts their financial analysis and an actual financial model that looks at what RTD can anticipate over the years and what their capacity for providing services out through the year 2050. So we mentioned this earlier, a couple of key findings that have risen to the top. Prior to 2020, RTD was operating more service than was financially sustainable over time. And they were doing that partially by deferring state of good repair. So this is maintenance and replacement of fleet and things like that. So putting that off in order to provide more service and put more service on the ground, but then, you know, of course, that becomes more costly. The state of good repair becomes more costly over time as you have more things that have to be repaired, and the repairs are bigger over time. So that is one of the recommendations that we'll talk about is, you know, sort of reining that in and making sure that you're providing services that you actually have financial capacity to provide. The long-term financial projections that are coming in, and they're still working out, dotting the I's and crossing the T's, although that doesn't make sense in the financial realm, but is that there is limited or no capacity to grow bus and rail services as we look to the long term. There's also not really capacity to make any substantial capital investments or complete any portion of the fast tracks that's not been completed yet in the next 20 years. And so what we're seeing as we look at that is that there is a pretty significant gap between what people want to see RTD do and be able to accomplish in the long term, and what RTD is going to be able to afford. And I don't think that is That is not an unusual, frankly, space for a transit agency to be in. Often costs are escalating at a greater rate than their finances and their revenues are. But it's something for us to be aware of, and that being financially sustainable over time is going to be an important piece of being a healthy organization. So to better understand this, we are looking at 3 financial scenarios, and we've simplified these into 3, but frankly, there's a whole bunch of variations and iterations even within these 3, but there's 3 really to start to have conversation around. So the first one is if RTD is unable to secure additional funds, what does service look like, and what is RTD able to do when they move out to 2050? And when we look at that scenario, it's something around being able to keep somewhere around SOP levels of service. Now, the service itself might look a lot different out in 2050, but that volume of service is about what RTD might be able to provide in perpetuity through 2050. The second one, if RTD is able to secure moderate levels of funding, so perhaps you Bruce, maybe you're able to increase your sales tax a bit, or some kind of a parking fees, something in that realm. If you're able to get some moderate levels of new funding, you could increase capacity consistent with what is anticipated in the region from a regional growth perspective. And this would be more consistent with what DRCOG anticipates growth to look like in 2050. And then we've got number 3, financial scenario number 3, where we assume, let's look at what we can do if RTD is able to secure a pretty sizable pot. What can they do? This is more of an aspirational plan. Within this, RTD is really able to increase the amount of service that they provide, meet the growth that's anticipated at the regional level, and then also start to help really support some of those statewide greenhouse gas reduction goals and some of those larger mobility goals as well. Tammy?
Yeah, Holly, I'm just kind of wondering, and you might speak to this, so I'm sorry if I'm early in the conversation, okay. But in your scenario number 3 here, the 4th bullet, supports statewide greenhouse gas reduction goals. I almost feel you need to have that with all of your scenarios, because we're kind of going to have to do that anyway.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I think maybe the wording there isn't quite right. And I would say that RTD, by the very nature of what it is, it's always supporting your greenhouse gas goals, right? Like if you're
right.
Getting people on a bus and we're working together to not be all out driving our cars, we're doing that. Here, this would be sort of taking it above and beyond to have some bigger investments to really move the needle on people getting to bus and providing some, maybe a quicker transition to a zero emission fleet would be the RTD would be able to accomplish. I love that point. I think there's some nuance to the wording there that we need to work on.
Yeah. Now that you say that, yeah, I think just, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Danny?
Yeah, thanks. Danny Katz with CoPERG here. Because you use the same language in number 2 and number 3, increases capacity consistent with regional growth. Mm-hmm. I feel like that could mean the aspirational plan just isn't as aspirational as it could be. So I would propose in number 3, maybe the thing to drive the evaluation is a goal around ridership. So some like double ridership, or
right.
double service, or something that, because otherwise I just worry. I think the aspirational needs to be totally removed from where we're at right now. And so anything that sort of like builds off of where we're at, I think will just fall short of what the purpose of that one is, which is to clearly tell the public, if you really wanted something huge, this is what it would cost you. And I think that's something the public just doesn't have the ability to wrap their head around. So I think number 3 should really be, it's less about kind of where we're at and growing in a particular way. And it's more about, if you really wanted to get to this mark way up here, and there
Mhm.
should be thought into what the mark is, you know, and I think there's ways to think about that, and happy to help, but just making sure that aspirational is truly, you know, focused on a reaching a goal versus growing from where we're at.
Okay. That's good. John?
Yeah, just real quick, I thought seconding Danny's point, and I'll just offer that, you know, one of the challenges here is that we just don't know how big the breadbasket is, or whatever the term is. You know, and so to get a sense of what it would take from our region to commit financially to achieving this vision, that's a component that we just need to have as part of this effort. And it's because ultimately we're going to be going to the voters or seeking funding from other sources to realize this vision. So, you know, that we're missing that financial component. And I do think that, you know, getting a sense of it will help folks to go, well, because it might not be that huge a lift to get there.
Right. Yeah. So this, I think that's a good segue to what our hope is here. We do, so to your point, Danny, we do have some rough numbers by way of how many people we think we can accommodate in that aspirational goal based on some really big aspirational modeling it's not really route by route based, but we go in and say, you know, if you were to just put this big investment into the system, how many people can we actually attract? So it helps, we could put some framework around that number. And we'll share those the next time when we put more definition around those scenarios. And then John, speaking to your point, our next steps will be to then say, okay, so if you have this aspirational goal and you're trying to say you're trying to serve, I'm going to throw out a number here, please don't quote me on this, but 700,000 boardings a day, which would be a big growth for RTD. What kind of investment do we need in the system? How do you get even enough capacity? Like right now, if you told RTD they had to serve 700,000 boardings a day, they would physically not be able to do that. There's not enough equipment, there's not enough operators, there's not enough capacity on the rail lines. That is not a possibility in the current system. So what does RTD need to do that? So we're trying to put that number out there and then identify this first point here, what's our gap? So, you know, here's how much money is the difference in being able to provide that level of service. Then we're looking at providing opportunities for additional revenue. That's what we're talking about. What if you get a little bit more sales tax? What if you get a little bit of property tax? What if you put some parking fees in? You know, looking at a variety of opportunities to increase that revenue and close that gap. And then from that, develop some funding strategies that RTD can pursue. And one that we'll talk about a little bit here in a minute, but one, of course, is getting rid of Tabor potentially for RTD, and even just allowing that amount of flexibility so we're not hampered by that growth. So, you know, there are some that might be a little easier, and then there's some that are going to require a little bit heavier lift than that as well.
This is great, Holly. So thanks for, I mean, that is the missing component here is what is it going to take to get us to a vision that people are excited about. So
yeah, and I had hoped to have a little bit more, at least on the order of magnitude today, but you know, those are numbers that you don't want to put out lightly. So they're in QC now. So the next time we get together, we'll have more information on that. Okay, so mobility plans for the future. Just as a recap here, we started with our guiding principles. I think you all are familiar with this. We have a lot of public outreach. We're doing a lot of analysis to understand what this future market is. We have a whole bunch of opportunities down here on the bottom right where how do we address that demand? And what does RTD look like? Is it an electrified fleet? Is it if it is, how do our maintenance facilities change? How does the workforce change? Are we an integrator? What does it actually look? What does the agency look like? And of course, the financial analysis and all of that rolls up, and we make some recommendations here for the mobility plan for the future, which is really a policy-based document that makes some recommendations for how what steps RTD needs to take in order to be prepared and very meaningful in the future. So why are we talking about the mobility plan for the future? I think we've all been talking about it already on this call, but we're preparing for future and evolving travel patterns. We know that the Denver Regional Council of Governments has identified a fairly sizable growth in population through 2050, somewhere around 30%. With that growth and the added congestion that could come with that, a potential for about a 70% growth in ridership and boardings and demand for RTD services. We also need to understand how we're integrating with those emerging technologies, supporting equity populations and being financially sustainable. One of the items that we've identified on here is really helping to restore community trust, because there's been a bit of it's been challenging that Fast Tracks did not go quite as Fast Tracks is so terrific, but it has not been as smooth as I think the community or the agency would hope. And so trying to make sure that we're able to move forward in the most productive way for the communities and for RTD as well. And then RTD during the development of the Reimagine RTD completed a strategic plan. So we also want to make sure that we're consistent with that. We went through these 5 steps. We start with what does success look like? Go out and try and think about what it is that you want RTD to look like in order to identify success. And then we have worked through these steps to figure out what actions we might take in order to help RTD get there. And then the outcome is what we refer to the mobility plan for the future, the outcome being an all-encompassing logical framework. You're glad we didn't put illogical in there, right? An all-encompassing logical framework of policies, partnerships, capital investments, and enhancements to move RTD forward. So through the whole process, what are some of the key takeaways? We have been soliciting your input, the technical working group, the board of directors. We've been to a host of different community activities to try and solicit input on what RTD should look like and learn more. And we have found that there is consistently across all groups, there is very strong support for enhanced service to social equity populations. So this is one of those ties from the SOP. You see us start to lay the groundwork in the system optimization plan, and that continues, and that theme continues forward into the mobility plan for the future. All groups that we talked to favored RTD acting as a mobility integrator. There's an important nuance here. We asked people, do you want RTD to be an innovator, an integrator, do nothing? What should RTD be doing? And people came back and said, we think RTD at that regional level makes a great integrator of services, but we don't think they should be the operator of all those services. So when it comes to things like scooters and bike shares and that, we are not looking for RTD to operate all of those and own all of those systems, but RTD needs to have a handle on what's happening throughout the region and help create that integration for the user to create a seamless experience for the customer. When we talked to you all and to the technical working group, there was a good support for that high frequency service to areas that were transit supportive, where land use has really supported transit over a coverage-based system. Because when we looked at that analysis, you'll remember we said, look at how many riders you can capture if you focus on that. If you go to a coverage-based system, you suddenly aren't getting riders on your service, and it costs you a lot more per rider. But the preliminary result from the board of directors was a little bit more leaning towards a coverage-based system. So just to be aware of that, but there's always a little tug and pull of how service is put on the ground. There was support for more service, obviously more reliable service, and certainly in this time when with the operator shortage and there's some dropped trips, that reliability has really risen to the top of being important. And then there's good support for regional transit backbone that would be provided by RTD, but that there could be partnerships put in place to operate potentially and pay for more local services. So using all of that information, we put together these vision statements. And Julie, I'm hoping you're out there and can help us through some dialogue here around these vision statements. So we asked, what does RTD look like in 2050? How would you describe it to somebody else? And we're going to use this to help create some strategies that set RTD in motion to achieve these vision statements that we have here. So we identified, well, Julie, do you want to go over them and then sort of step through a conversation about the vision statements?
Absolutely, it'd be my pleasure. We do have a question from Audrey before we jump
yes.
in. She was asking about why we're not formally adopting, the board of directors is not formally adopting the mobility plan for the future, that we're submitting it for their consideration.
Oh yeah. Brian or Bill, do you want to touch on that? I think that was always the plan with it, but I'm not sure if there's some larger reason why adopted or not adopted.
Yeah, Holly, I can answer that question. The reason is that the Reimagine RTD is going to focus on a set of follow-up implementation strategies that all will likely require subsequent processes to get to the board of directors and ultimately have them make policy decisions. Given the breadth and scope of what we're including in these recommendations, it was judged that it wouldn't be appropriate to try and get board action on all of them, but rather to direct the board to what we believe to be our short, mid, and long-term tactics and actions consistent with our strategic plan that should be followed up on. And that's why the mobility plan for the future is not an actionable document for the board, which contrasts it from the system optimization plan, which is a board action. I hope that answers the question.
Okay. Terrific. Thank you so much. So let's jump into, so as Holly mentioned, we've given you a lot of sort of background and reminding of where we've been over the last few years with this project, and we appreciate you guys hanging in there with us. We have done an extensive amount of outreach. We have spent a lot of time with you. We've done listening sessions. We spent time with the board. So what you're going to see in these next slides are really a conglomeration of everything that we've been hearing, everything that we've heard over the last couple of years. So, and we're trying to distill it down into first the initial vision, which is what on these slides we'll talk about. But then we're going to get into, for each of these, what do those strategies look like? How is RTD, what should RTD be doing to accomplish this vision? How should they be doing it, and what metrics should they be using to actually measure success? So first we're going to stay at the high level, but then we're going to get into a little bit more detail. So what does RTD look like in 2050? When we kind of put our long-term hat on and we're thinking, into the future, the recommendations from the consulting team, and I should stress that these have not been formally adopted by the RTD board. And so these are the recommendations that the project team is going to take to the board. And this is your opportunity to weigh in. We would love your thoughts on it. So from an initial vision perspective, we see RTD as an integrator of regional mobility services. As Holly was discussing, this does not mean that RTD owns the different components. RTD is not going to get into the scooter business, for example, but from a customer-facing experience, RTD is the place to go to figure out how to do your trips and to figure out how to integrate with all these different opportunities for mobility providers. That's that integrator role. Also staying as a provider of high quality, high capacity regional transit systems. So what we mean by that is that we are not recommending at this time that RTD get away from mass transit, that RTD is still going to be operating the larger buses, still going to be looking at the regional connections. RTD, we're not recommending at this time that RTD transitions into, more of an Uber or a Lyft or individual transit, personal rapid transit, that kind of thing. So it's really continuing to focus on that high quality, high capacity, regionally based system. So really focusing on that R in RTD, that would be RTD's focus. Facilitator of a robust partnership program. We've started talking about that a little bit. We've got some more details in our strategies. We think this is feedback we have gotten loud and clear so strongly from you guys, from the public, from every group that we've met with. There needs to be partnerships. We need to be open to innovation. There needs to be opportunities for individuals from other jurisdictions or from the private sector to come in and say, I've got an idea, RTD partner with me to figure out how to improve our services or provide more services. Acting as a trusted mobility leader, supporting innovation. So this is the idea of now we're thinking about technology opportunities in the future, autonomous vehicles, what are these new technologies and how do they get integrated into our local transportation system? So we're not saying that RTD is bleeding edge. We're not saying RTD is developing technologies. What we're saying is RTD would be in a great position by 2050 to be evaluating. So here's a new opportunity. Let's look at an opportunity to test it out, to see how it would apply, to see if it would make sense for the local region. Employer of choice, obviously, you know, with workforce being one of our biggest challenges, we've really got to continue focusing on how do we attract employees, how do we retain employees, and how do we value our employees. So that's obviously got to continue to being a big focus. Financially stable, that's key. If you don't have the revenues coming in and you can't be spending more money than you have coming in. And so really making sure, and that's a big focus of the SOP, is really living within our means. So that's a big focus on the SOP that continues on into a mobility plan for the future. And then an active regional partner. There's been a lot of discussion about the new GHG plan, and obviously RTD is a big contributor to the more people we can get out of single occupancy vehicles, the better off it's going to be from air quality. So really making sure that RTD has a seat at that table and is really engaging and looking to be partnering and supporting of achieving these goals. So with this, like I said, we're going to get into the more detailed strategies here in a minute, but love your thoughts on, what do you think of this? Is this something you could support? Is this what you envision RTD should look like in 2050? Or are we missing something? Or is there anything you disagree with? Jill, start us off. Thank you so much for jumping in.
I'm not sure if you're planning on establishing separate goal statements, but it seems to me something that's missing here is a statement of the goals we're trying to achieve, of higher ridership, mode shift, greenhouse gas emissions reduction. I don't see that reflected here.
Well, we're going to get into that a little bit with the next section when we get into a little bit more of the details. You bet. So that's a great point, Jill. Other comments, other thoughts? What are we missing? Is there anything here that you would be concerned about? Anything that you feel like RTD should be thinking about that we don't have on the list? Come on, you guys are not a shy group. So I think, you know, I'll throw out some of the feedback we got from the technical working group. We got challenged a little bit from a couple of people. I think overall we saw a lot of support for this, but we did have a few folks challenging us on, should RTD be taking this on, or should RTD maybe be working with somebody else who's an integrator, for example? You know, should RTD just be focusing on, you know, just providing service? Any thoughts on that?
I'll jump in there, like,
please, Danny.
From a consumer perspective, I think RTD is likely the largest piece of your trip. Yep. And so it's where you're going to go to RTD first to plan out the trip. So to me, it doesn't immediately seem like a bad idea for RTD to then have all the information about the scooters and all the other first and last mile connections. So I would agree with that comment if there was a more obvious place for someone would start when they're looking up information about their about, you know, how they're going to get around. But I would think for the average person, they would go, oh, I need to get from A to B, and a bus or train will play a big role in that. So you start with the bus or the train, and then you get the rest of the info. So it doesn't seem like it doesn't seem wrong to me.
Well, and that is the vision. I think that's a great point, is from a customer's perspective, it just makes things seamless. So you get to a point where you know that's one stop. You don't even realize that maybe you're working with 3 different companies. So that is part of the idea with this. Councilwoman Mara, I called you, I believe I called you a commissioner earlier, and I am so sorry about that.
Oh, please don't worry about that. That's not important at all. But, you know, just being part of the State Transportation Advisory Committee, and they, you know, that's with CDOT, and they're talking about their bus staying services. And, you know, that's that regional mobility. And they're talking about expanding their services. And I do know there's some, they work together with RTD, but my question is, who takes lead? Right? I mean, is somebody oversee this? Is that RTD's role when you say you're the integrator of regional mobility services? Are you the lead that says, okay, this is what we have now, CDOT and bus staying, okay, let's get together and talk about what you have. Is that kind of what you're envisioning that bullet point to be?
Mhm. Holly, would you have to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I've turned my camera on, but I now for some reason can't see anybody, so I am out here, hopefully.
We can see you.
Okay, well, unfortunately I can't see you, which makes it way less conversational, but we'll make do. My vision of this from the conversations that we've had and the input that we received is that RTD would take the lead role within the region and probably be for that integrator of services. When it comes to CDOT, I think that RTD has a great opportunity to take a lead role unless CDOT decides that they want to put something at a statewide level, in which case RTD's services would be integrated into a state program. So when I think of like mobility as a service, you have a platform. One of them that I suggested that people go look at yesterday is a platform called, I don't know the proper pronunciation, it's either Jelby or Yelby, Jelbi. It's German. You can go look at it on your app, on your apps and download it. But it is a program where if you're going to ride a service, you can click on the bottom and look for scooters and car share, and you can ride the commuter rail and you can find information about that. So you do want it to be at a pretty high regional level. If the state is going to take something on and do it, they could. But for this discussion here, I would put RTD in the driver's seat for leading that effort within the region. And yesterday, as Julie said, there was some discussion around, could it be CDOT? Could it be the Denver Regional Council of Governments potentially?
Okay, thank you.
Great. Any other thoughts on the vision before we get into a little bit more on the strategies? Let me ask the question this way. Could you support this? Because obviously we are looking for, the boards are going to need your support, the region's going to need your support as we're moving forward in transit. Could you support this? Maybe thumbs up or let us know if someone wants to talk about who not being able to support. So we just like to get some sort of sense from you guys. I feel like we're on the right track. So we got a couple of thumbs up. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Anybody that doesn't feel like they could support this?
No, I think it's a great vision. I mean, obviously it's the implementation and how do we get there, but, and especially regarding CDOT, up here on the north side, we're, in the northeast and northwest regions, we've got the crash corridor is a huge, hindrance to, sorry, there's my camera. It's dangerous and it is wholly inadequate for the amount of population growth we're expecting, and it's a bottleneck. It's a huge problem, and we really need. It's going to cost a lot of money, but we have a lot of people moving to this region, and we need that. We need that park and ride at 88th, which there's been some concern about that. There was a move to eliminate that stop, and we need that center loading. That we need the buses to be able to do that center loading ramp in the middle of the interstate as opposed to going off on the sides. We've got to push for these things and push CDOT to invest where the population is growing. I mean, the north side, I'll just say, we're always the last. We're always the last to receive the maximum and adequate services. And so any way that we can push and really be, and I'll do everything I can to get my colleagues to join in and voice their concerns. I know our staff here in Thornton is highly engaged. Kent Moorman is working on this all the time. But being a provider of the saying that you're the system prioritizing service for those that need it most. I mean, that's crucial. That's crucial to the growth of the metro area and making it a viable, sustainable place for high quality of life for people to live.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. And Kent Moorman's been great to work with on this. He's been a super great resource for your area. Well, we'd like to get into the strategies a little bit if you want to move forward. So let's go into a little bit deeper dive on this. So Holly, do you want to kind of walk us through?
Sure. So this is where I thought, Ron, if you're still out there, we might want to have a discussion here about your strategy about contracted service versus RTD service. So these are not in the same order that we just spoke of them with Julie, but they're the same statement up at the top. So employer of choice, and then what should RTD do? Foster a dynamic, diverse workforce that promotes engagement and innovation. And then on the far right side, Jill, I think it was you that said, well, how you're measuring, what you have achieved. So the measurement here is the portion of workforce identified as engaged through an annual engagement survey. And our goal is to have everybody engaged. And I don't know that I've ever seen an organization actually achieve 100% engaged employees, but I think it's the goal you want to set. You certainly want everyone to be, if that's possible. And then the center section is really, these are the real tangible actions that RTD can take, and our recommendations that came from you all from our ideation session back in March of 2021. We went to talk to a variety of organizations, the board, to get a lot of ideas. Our technical experts in each of these areas provided insights. So these strategies are those that, and I bolded some only for dialogue here, but please take a look at all of them and provide feedback on any of them. And we'll be sending you and the technical working group a survey monkey, so that hopefully you'll take a minute to review each of them and provide us some feedback on these statements that we've made here. So you'll have another opportunity, but it's a little hard to just send it in survey monkey without some conversation around it. So we thought it would be good to dig in a little bit at the meeting today. So the one that I flagged here was create and implement an employee value proposition campaign. This is really a bit around what we talked about in the partnership scoring rubric as well, that there's a pretty big and important push for RTD to ensure that people that work for the organization really have a sense of the value in our community, and that they are doing some really great work for our community and are very valued within the organization and valued within the community. And if you're an employee at RTD right now, it's a little hard. There's a lot of negative press out there. So while we have issues attracting workforce, we're certainly not helping it by the continued sort of negative reinforcement around RTD, really trying to make sure that they understand that it is such a valuable piece of our mobility puzzle and our health of our whole community. And so that's what that value proposition is. And then we have some other real tactical things that have come up through the conversations that we have, creating a cooperative CDL training program, providing more stronger part-time service, part-time employment opportunities. We found that people, they don't love the split shift, but part-time seem to be something that people could get on board with. So there's a variety of recommendations that have been made here. And one that we could talk about is the idea of maybe we add a strategy in here to Ron's point that says evaluate opportunities to reduce competition between contracted and RTD staff or something, and this obviously is a legislative action, but we could put something in here that would touch on that if we're interested in that. So feedback, thoughts, Julie, do you want to?
I know this one's a little bit more internally focused, related to RTD, but we definitely love your perspective. Danny, do you have some thoughts on this?
Yeah, as I understand it, the contract that was signed with the union is, I think, a 3-year contract. And so given that this is really about the mobility plan for the future, so it's sort of imagining the next 20 to 30 years, it does seem like there should be something here that's like, not annual, but I guess every 2 to 3 year evaluation of the contract, so that, so we know if in a couple of years we're still missing the mark in terms of just basic recruitment, pay, and benefits, that can be transparently communicated, because I would imagine at some point, RTD just will need more money from the public in order to fund the operators and drivers at the level that we need to fund them in order to recruit enough of them to then hit our big ridership goals. It's all connected. So if the public doesn't have a sense that we're still missing the mark, RTD is essentially funded by us. And so if we don't know we're underfunding them, then I think that's a missed opportunity. So something here that just creates like a cycle of evaluating that and communicating back out if there are things there that we can help with that are outside of maybe more the internal working conditions, which are more of a internal policy mechanism.
I think that's an excellent point. Our hope is by 2050 that we're not in the same situation, but I think you're absolutely right. How do we know that unless we're tracking it at key milestones throughout the process? So I think that's great feedback. Other thoughts on this? We have a comment in the chat from Tammy saying, I like the part-time idea. However, it does need to be attractive, such as health insurance, educational support. That's a great point, that part-time, but you got to balance that. What does that mean for individuals in terms of benefits and what they'll need for their families? So that's a great note. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's very important to track this and it would be great for RTD to have the reputation of being a very desirable employer. Mass transit is so integral to the success and of any metropolitan area, that we really want those employees to feel valued and for it to be and for RTD to be very competitive in the workforce recruitment. So I do think it's important to track that and see what things you can do to. Sometimes this fixes, as everybody knows, the fixes can be simple and not terribly expensive, and then sometimes it's a larger conversation. But definitely, it would be great for that RTD to have that image, and so I think it's great that you're tracking all of this data so that you know where to target your energies and your resources.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that feedback. That's great. Ron?
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback on my earlier statements. Going back to the contracted services, I bring that notion up not only because I think it would be more cost effective and more beneficial to employees to be underneath one umbrella, because right now there's definitely a separation between the conditions of contracted employees and RTD employees. And there is right now influx of contracted employees wishing to come to RTD. I think it would be beneficial on a lot of aspects to really look into possibly, aligning some thoughts on possibly making that happen. Like I said, it would be cost effective and as well as encourage a better working environment for all operators. We just negotiated a contract with RTD, and it was a very good contract, but it's a step in the right direction. We still have some steps to take as far as working conditions and things of that nature, other elements. But I think if all operators were on that same page in that same category, that would also motivate, because employees are our biggest recruiters as far as bringing people in the fold. So if all those conditions are looked at and changed, I think RTD would be well on their way to be fully staffed and make great strides, because the employees, like I said, speak volumes. The employees create the condition, are the spokespersons out there in the street as far as service. We know we are viable community servants. That's part of the reason we took this job. I am an operator, been an operator for 23 years. I love my job. I love being a part of the community. So with that being said, those few steps I think should really be examined and looked at. I really feel like a huge corner could be turned if that came into fruition.
Terrific. No, we really appreciate your feedback, that you've given us some good things to think about. So thank you so much. Brian, did you want to have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just really quickly, Ron, thank you for that input. The Reimagine RTD scope of work specifically will include our consultant team making recommendations on RTD's relationship with our contractors specifically on how the facilities are handled, because we need to look at all of our facilities. And one of the questions that the consultant team will provide a recommendation on is, should we continue to have the same ownership relationship that currently exists between the facilities that we own and then the ones that are operated by our contracted operators. Now, your comments on the workforce issues are excellent. And while the consultant team may not delve into that at that level, it does warrant action and follow-up. So what we can do, Ron, is make sure that when we report back to the board of directors, we will forward that narrative that will be, it'll complement and action items that will be addressing how RTD should approach its facilities in the future. But thank you for sharing that.
Terrific. Thank you so much. With watching our time here, I think that probably, Holly, let's move to the financial.
Okay. Yep. Let's do it. So the next one was ensuring that RTD is a financially stable agency. So we've identified what should RTD do: create a financial stability and serve as good stewards of taxpayer dollars. And on the right, we have identified some metrics. Again, everything here is draft, and this is, I want to reiterate again that this is information and recommendations that have come from you all and from the project team, through the communities that we've been working with and hearing from throughout the project. But it in no way has been vetted. These are not recommendations that have yet gone through the board of directors. So I just want to be clear of where we are in the process here. This is all just for dialogue. So a few that came out under financial, being financially stable, is that RTD will always prioritize the state of good repair during every budget cycle. They will operate services within their financial capacity. And given what we talked about with the financial space and the scenarios that we talked about, work to remove the Tabor restrictions on sales tax and seek additional funding sources. Another one that I thought was of interest and has really risen to the top and created some dialogue yesterday with the technical working group as well, is that RTD should increase and enforce minimum household job densities where they're providing service, and continuity within the service district. So this is really focusing on RTD provides service where they get the most bang for the buck, essentially. So the higher density areas and those that are transit supportive, and when they have to make choices of where to provide service, that they're focused on those transit supportive areas. And then you'll see that there are a variety of other strategies that we've included in here as well.
So thoughts on this? Do you feel like we've structured this thing in terms of what RTD should do? Are we measuring it correctly? Any thoughts on any of these strategies? So I think we might be, I think some of our other areas might be a little bit more engaging to the external group, but the financial, got to get our financial house in order. That's a fundamental piece of this for sure.
Yeah, yes. We can't do much of anything if we're not around to operate.
Exactly. Well, why don't we move
I guess
on to the next
one idea, I think you're already doing this, but I'll just say it out loud. When it comes to the electrification, the electric bus possibilities with RTD, I know that in the past, because it's a new field, the pricing that the utilities offer hasn't been in sync with providing RTD the cost savings that you should be getting in theory by going electric on the school bus, on the transit buses. And so something in here of just like making sure that the utility pricing systems, the charging times, all that is set up in the way that it should be set up, such that you are seeing the big savings on your operations side. And I think that maybe hasn't happened yet and should happen in the future. And as soon as we can make that happen, it will, I think, bring good, financial stability as well. So just making sure we nail that.
So something along the lines of, just writing myself some notes here. It's something along the lines of working with the utility providers on their rate pricing, or to ensure optimal rate pricing, or something like that.
Yeah, optimal rate pricing. Yeah, I think that's it. And it's utilities and regulators, because it could just
Okay.
be a regulator might need to step in and just help. I
Okay.
don't know. I don't know if there's a problem or where, but to the extent there is, working with
Okay.
regulators and utilities to ensure optimal pricing is in place to get benefits from vehicle electrification.
Okay, great.
Perfect. Thank you for that feedback. John?
Yeah, I just want to put in a good word for, first of all, just the increased enforcement of the minimum household job density. I just think that's such a step forward for RTD, and just so aligns with its mission to help use transportation services and the investments they make to drive land use planning that is serving so many goals. So that's huge advancement. And then it wasn't highlighted, but the whole notion of this using the area around bus stops, et cetera, for investment, and then having RTD reap that benefit. There's so much opportunity there. I mean, it's, I know in the past that was somewhat frowned upon. I mean, look at Union Station. I mean, that whole area, RTD essentially handed over the development rights. I think that there's so much more that they could gain long-term for long-term fiscal sustainability by allowing folks to rent, use the property, but RTD holding on to some of the revenue generation. So I want to emphasize that.
Well, thank you, John. And also, I didn't recognize you had a comment in the chat earlier. I apologize, I didn't highlight it, but I thought that was an interesting. You were kind of reacting to the board maybe leaning a little bit more towards a coverage model. Did you want to talk about that a little bit to the group?
Oh yeah, well, I did. Listen, we've talked about how we, as the group that's been advising on the long-term vision, have said, listen, there's other priorities aside from spreading the peanut butter across thinly across the region, and it's the largest region, so or transit district practically in the country. So to understand why board directors, other than maybe politically protecting some service that is not serving other goals, it'd probably better to have a conversation with them than to us throw the tennis ball over the wall and then have them just take a different approach. I think that better to engage in that kind of dialogue with the board and have them, maybe they have a different perspective that we might learn from. So.
Terrific. Thank you for that feedback.
Yep.
Being a former board member, you recognize all those all those challenges.
Exactly. Totally.
Terrific. All right. Well, I think Holly, let's move on to the next one.
Okay. So there are two pieces to this. The next statement was that RTD is a provider of high quality, high capacity regional transit system, prioritizing service for those that need it most. So this first slide is really talking about what it means to be that high quality, high capacity backbone. And there was quite a few strategies here. So then the prioritizing service for those that need it most are on the next slide, just so you know. I'll try and cover both of them here. So this speaking back to John, you called out the high density, supporting the higher density and transit supportive land uses. This is a bit in line with that. So the first one that we flag here is operate and fund regional routes that serve the highest demand travel sheds to create a regionally focused backbone service. So it's really trying to, what are those most important services that RTD needs to provide and is most well equipped to provide, because they are the ones that can cross those jurisdictional boundaries most readily and provide those regional services. And then we have a variety of other strategies here that revolve around increasing bus capacity, increasing the investment in BRT, improving ADA accessibility throughout the system, increasing light rail capacity. So, if you're familiar with what happens today, there are several areas north of Broadway. There's a pinch point that creates some capacity issues. The commuter rail also has some limited capacity at Union Station, and if we want to complete fast tracks, of course, that would be in that as well. And then when it comes to those prioritizing access to high quality services for social equity populations, we flagged a couple here. Prioritize service investments in social equity communities to ensure that their needs are met first. And then the other one was, so that's the service investments, and that's what you're actually operating. And then the third one we also flagged here, prioritize capital investments to equity communities to ensure that their mobility needs are met first. And that's really the capital side of the investment. So on the metric side, we have several metrics, and we've talked about those with the system optimization plan, the portion of social equity populations that have access to 15-minute or better service, the portion of the social equity groups that have access to service, period, and we want to make sure that that's high. And then the one that I flagged on the bottom here is the portion of annual capital investments spent on social equity communities. Here we set the goal at 40%, and that was really around, and I'm not sure if people are familiar with this, but the federal dialogue around the Justice 40 initiative that is, I can't remember the exact language, but it's 40% of investments are focused on social equity communities.
So thoughts on this one? Again, a lot of this, these strategies came from you guys. They came from a lot of different groups. So wanted to make sure you guys are kind of on board with this. Jill.
I'm just curious if you could speak to how you arrived at the goals of doubling the number of routes with frequent service and transit mode share and getting to 10%. Like, how does that relate to our greenhouse gas emission goals or other goals? And then a comment, it'd be nice to see something a little bit more explicit about affordability. It's mentioned in the mobility wallet section, but maybe kind of similar to the ratio of transit to auto travel time, talking about making sure transit is more affordable than driving, and we're not subsidizing drivers with, free parking, for example, more so than riders with affordable fares.
Okay, so the metrics, some of them are from metrics that were suggested by the group. Some were metrics that we evaluated through the modeling work that we did and then set a goal that was an improvement for that. Or in some cases, it was looking at, here's like everything we could put into the system, what could we achieve, and maybe even trying to push that a little bit. That was more around the mode share and the travel times. And then I mentioned how the 40% was flagged. That was more based around the Justice 40 initiative that is at the federal government level. The other two at the top were more focused on what are we actually accomplishing today, and and making sure that we have made a marked improvement moving forward. If we feel like the goals are, another way that we sometimes address the goals is like saying something like continuously increasing year after year, things like that. If we feel like we don't want to be set, like for instance, if you don't want to be set to social equity populations at 15-minute or better service at 75%, you could say continuously increasing year after year without setting what that actual goal is. So I'd love to hear more in dialogue. And I agree around affordability. We'll see what we can add around that.
Terrific, thank you. Director Geisinger.
Thank you very much. I keep trying to raise my hand and for some reason it kept dropping, but I just wanted to address John's question really quickly and sort of reiterate the way Holly put out the question of the board being, I think you said it was an early statement and the board was a little more focused on coverage. And I think both of those statements are very true. If I recall correctly, it was a Minty poll from probably close to 3 years ago, maybe, Holly. And I don't remember exactly the outcome, but the point was made in the meeting the other night when we discussed this, that really it's a continuum. And I don't know, I'm not speaking for the board, but I wouldn't take that too heavily as being in contradiction to what this group is saying. Maybe it is, but I just thought I'd put that in some context.
Terrific.
Yeah,
Thanks
I
for that.
appreciate that.
And it was early on in this project. Go ahead, Holly. Sorry.
Well, yeah, it was early. And I would say there's just by the very nature of how the board comes to be, there is a responsibility by each of the board of directors to represent their area. So by the very nature of that structure, there is going to always be some sort of tug and pull within those. And it is absolutely a continuum, and it's not a this or that. But when we talk about it, there's always and rightfully so. They have been elected to represent an area as well as the region, so they are always in that space of trying to balance those.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think when it comes down to specific service needs, as you've said, everybody throughout the district, the main thing you hear is we want more service, right? Yeah. So we're hearing that too, and specifically, but I think we're all looking at the good of the district as well as what our constituents are asking for. Thanks.
Absolutely. Yes, with the 1,600 comments we got on the SOP, I would imagine 80 to 85% where we want more service, more enhanced service, more frequent service. So it's great. I mean, that's great that there's a demand out there, the desire out there. Director Davidson.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you, Director Geisinger, for making the comments. I just wanted to very quickly echo the sentiment Director Geisinger is relaying, that while there was some early on feedback from the board, I think it's been some time since the board really deliberately discussed that. And when we look at the intersection of SOP and mobility plan for the future, I would expect that at that study session we've all been talking about here, at the risk of just continuing to tease out coming attractions, I think based on the discussion that we had at the last committee, the board will be discussing and revisiting that concept and certainly sharing perspectives. So again, one thing I just wanted to share with everybody that as Director Geisinger alluded to, there's quite a bit of interest, I think, in just revisiting the implications of that early feedback and checking whether that really does match the intent of where the board has been wanting to go, and that we've been clear. I think that will come out in the discussion at that study session. So thank you for allowing me to comment on that.
Terrific. No, thank you for jumping in. We really appreciate it. Any other thoughts, any other comments? Kind of similar to the discussions we've been having. Are you supportive of this? Is there anyone that sees this and says, I don't think this is the way RTD should be going. I don't think this is the focus. I don't think these are the outcomes. Any thoughts, any concerns, anything we might be missing? Got some thumbs up. Thank you.
Oh, I guess I would just say, this seems pretty good, but this is like the biggest decision to be made in the whole Reimagine RTD for me. So like, I don't know if the 10% is right or the 90% is right. So like, this seems pretty good, but I'm imagining we're going to discuss this more and get into more details. So I think we should move forward on this. So just to kind of confirm, a thumbs up doesn't mean you should send this to the board.
We're done, Danny, we're done.
Yeah.
No,
yeah.
No, and part of what you're going to see that we're going to get into next that I think you'll find very interesting is when we start relating these strategies to the financial scenarios, because the reality is a lot of what we're recommending you'd want to do no matter what, but the level and the degree and how much you'd be able to do of it is somewhat dependent on how much revenue you have coming in. And so I think we'll get into a lot more of that nuance that I think you'd like to see, Danny, when we start discussing these within the context of the financial scenarios as well. Well, Hallie, do you want to move to our next one?
Sure. So one that we have had a fair bit of discussion on already, but is worth circling back on here is integrator of regional mobility services. And I actually feel like this should be reworded to regional integrator of mobility services. That would be my first comment on our slide here. So what should RTD do on the left side? Improve the customer experience through integration with other mobility services. How do we measure that? A customer satisfaction rating from an annual survey. So the goal, this is one of those where we changed it. The goal is that year after year, you're showing demonstrated increase in customer satisfaction. And hopefully we can, that should be a goal we have all the time. The one that we flagged here is develop a holistic RTD-owned customer engagement platform. So this is really that Gelby that I mentioned to you earlier. It's a platform similar to that, and RTD is taking action to do some of that, both in-house and kind of third-party providers of that, and trying to see what makes the most sense for them. And then we have a variety of other recommendations that have been flagged here as well.
So we talked a little bit about this one already, but this gives you a little bit more sense of that. And, I kind of feel like we've dug into this one a little bit in our discussions around the vision statement. So, but just wanted to give anybody else another opportunity if there's anything else you see that's missing or that you think we should be considering, especially in terms of how we're doing it. Any thoughts on this one?
The only thing I'll flag, I do think CDOT is thinking something quite similar in terms of creating a integrated, place where you find everything. And so for the busing service and beyond, and I think they're developing it so that local transit agencies can just use their tool. So just making sure we shouldn't be competing with them. So just
No, I think that's a great point. And integrating and partnering with CDOT on this would obviously be, crucial to the success of it for sure.
Yeah, and certainly if CDOT is doing something, I think what we want to understand is CDOT willing to get down into the 40 plus local agencies in the metro area and understand, who does have the scooters and the bike share and the car share available within their community, to make sure that it is truly holistic for that mobility within the metro area.
Troy, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that we already are working with CDOT on this issue. We did get an AIM grant a few years ago related to integrating our payment platform with theirs, so that if you were riding Mustang and you were coming from out on the western slope and you wanted to, then connect to RTD services, you would have the ability to kind of do that seamlessly within one platform. We're working on that. It's not quite there yet, but it is something we're working on. So we're already kind of working on this issue. And it also is related to the kind of overall strategies identified in the mobility choice blueprint as well.
Terrific. Thank you for adding that, Bill. Would you like to move on to the next, Holly?
Yes. So this next one is trusted mobility leader supporting innovation through continuous evaluation of emerging technologies. What should RTD do? Lead evaluation and implementation of regional mobility services. And how do we measure this? And here we talked about RTD being evaluated by the local agencies. And one of the evaluation metrics would be speaking to RTD acting as a mobility leader. A couple that we flagged, specific strategies in the middle there, invest in data and data sharing infrastructure, and create memorandum of understanding with the state and local partners for that data sharing and access. I mean, data is just absolutely one of the things that is, we have so much data that's starting to come in, and making sure that we can share it appropriately across agencies and use it to ensure that we are continuously evaluating, are the services responding to the travel needs of the community? And that is one of those areas where we want to just make sure that we're collecting the data and able to use it effectively. And then at the very bottom, much like the partnerships that we talked about earlier, committing, we say here 1% of operating budget to research and innovation annually. Again, I have to throw out, this is nothing vetted here by the board of directors. They've not committed to anything, but this is just a recommendation that came through the hopper and that we thought had some merit for discussion.
Thoughts on this one? So a lot of our feedback, especially when we go to the public, we're hearing a lot about how do you plan for 2050, given that we don't know where the technology is going to end up. They're all new, businesses getting into this sector with all sorts of innovative ideas. And so this is our way to frame what would RTD's role be within that sort of future technology vision. Any thoughts on this one? You feel like we're on the right track? Is there anything we're missing?
I don't know exactly how you would say this here, but I would want to focus on technologies that are actually really practical and beneficial as opposed to shiny objects. You know, like autonomous vehicles capture a lot of attention, but it's unclear how practical or how many of our problems they're actually going to solve. Whereas just having a better system for people to pay for transit would be great.
So some sort of how do we vet?
So I wonder if we need to add in here test emerging technologies, and we give these examples, and it's something like you're testing them for implementation of the benefit of the agency or the community mobility need, perhaps something in that realm.
Or prioritizing those technologies that are, you know, achieving our guiding principles and meeting our vision, you know, something along those lines. It feels like, Jill, you're talking about some sort of vetting process even before we determine where RTD does the testing.
Yeah, I like that, tying it back to what are we trying to accomplish, and does the technology further that?
That's a great point. Thank you, Jill. Absolutely. I think we've got one more. Is that right, Holly? To go through, because I want to watch our time here. Oh, the partnerships. Yes.
Okay, so partnerships, we've also touched on this a fair bit, but the RTD acting as the facilitator of a robust partnership program, what would they do? Create and fund a partnership program to better meet local needs and increase local funding investment in transit. So on the right side, then we have a metric that is, again, I just have to keep saying it because I want to make sure that everybody's clear that these are for us to sort of vet and go through and hear from you, but not at all recommendations from the RTD or RTD board. The portion of non-RTD funds invested in the region's mobility system. And then we talked about the portion of the agencies identified as satisfied through an annual survey of local agencies. And then we have several strategies in the middle there. We've talked about that we're working on creating that well-defined partnership and grant program, annually committing 2 to 4% of annual operating budget to a new grant program, and then executing an annual survey and continuing to work with the TMAs of the region.
So we've talked a bit about this one, but this is giving you a little bit more details. Do you feel like we're heading in the right direction in terms of structuring it? This one, previous to our discussion, we were talking with Danny, obviously the financial scenario would influence how much funding is available for partnerships. And so this will be more robust or less robust depending on where RTD ends up from a financial perspective. But the idea is really opening the door for innovation, really opening the door for that local knowledge, really opening the door for those opportunities to partner together to come up with solutions. So any thoughts on this one? I feel like this one we've vetted a little bit, so I feel like we may be in the good place with this one. But just wanted to make sure especially, you know, these goals, do they make sense? Do you like the idea of allocating an actual formal budget to this? Again, we'll have to see what the board thinks of that.
I do like, sorry, just butting in.
Please jump in, John.
Yeah, thanks. I do like the idea of some sort of a budgeted amount, but I just will argue that it's hard to set a specific goal. I mean, we could find that these are, you know, much more viable than we anticipated, or maybe less. So I just would say something like, you know, push them forward in a manner that is aggressive, you know, something like that.
I like that. So give us a little bit more flexibility, because you're right. Every partnership could be a little bit different in terms of how it's structured. That's a great point, John.
Yep, thanks.
Any other thoughts on this one? Was that the last one, or is there one more, Holly? I apologize.
We've got one more.
One more. All right. I'm excited.
All right. And I think this is it. Let's see here. But this is one that I like and think is really important as well. So RTD is an active regional partner supporting mobility and state climate action goals. On the left side, provide sustainable mobility options and seek to reduce environmental impact. On the right side, how are we measuring that? This one is a little dicey to measure. We've put it in vehicle miles of travel and decrease the vehicle miles of travel per capita. I mean, it's not directly tied to the greenhouse gas, but it is a good hybrid metric, given that doing that specific greenhouse gas calculation is really more at the DRCOG level. So that would be a little bit challenging to do for RTD on an annual basis if we're reviewing these annually. Strategies that we have identified in the middle: lead development of transit-focused recommendations to support state and regional climate actions, climate initiatives, encourage that transit supportive growth throughout the region, incorporate lead practices when they're having capital investments, and then we identified the potential to transition to a zero emission fleet.
So thoughts on this one? This is obviously something we've heard quite a bit. Yes, Audrey, jump in.
Thank you. This one to me relates back to my question regarding whether the mobility plan for the future will be board approved. And so if in fact the goal here is to lead development of transit focused recommendations and to work with communities to support transit supportive growth and land use, I would think that jurisdictions in particular would really want to see that RTD is committed to the mobility plan of the future, and there's no stronger way to do that than having the plan be approved by the board. Otherwise, there is, there's how are communities supposed to take it seriously?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I appreciate that feedback. Absolutely. We'll take that back, Audrey. Thank you. We also have a comment in the chat from Jill suggesting maybe we look at an actual numeric goal for VMT reduction as opposed to just a decrease per capita based on the modeling of what it would take to meet the sort of long-term GHG reduction goals. So that's something we can think about as well.
Yep.
Other thoughts on this one?
Just on that last one, CDOT's greenhouse gas emissions rule has a scenario where they sort of say, here's one way you could get to it. And they called out a 70% increase in transit service or ridership. Now I can't remember, by 2030. So again, just highlighting, like, there are some evaluations that have been done. And so this is one of those where maybe you can just take from something else that's been done as a guide.
Okay. Is that, can you, I've seen some of those, the mitigation measures through that, but can you help refresh my memory? The 70% is statewide, or is that CDOT, the rural areas? I don't recall what that is.
Yeah, I believe it's statewide. But remember that their goal for 2030 is really only requiring DRCOG and the North Front Range Rail MPO to have to do stuff. The other ones don't kick in till later. So it's really going to fall on the shoulders of the Denver region to be able to hit that 70%. Also, because just based on how much share of transit we have, it can almost be an RTD goal, I think. And it was in their cost benefit analysis. So it was in a supporting document for the rule where they sort of hypothesized, here's a scenario, and I can send that your way. They've got some bike goals and other things in there.
That'd be terrific. Thank you so much, David. Any other thoughts, comments on this one? Well, as Holly said, you guys have been a little bit quiet today, so we are going to set up a follow-up to this. We also know we didn't send this in advance, so we want you to have some time to really sit with and think about it. We will be in the next day or so following up with a Survey Monkey. Very simple, should only take you a couple minutes, so please participate if you have a few minutes with us, where you can go through each of these strategies and really give us your thoughts on, yep, I think this makes sense, nope, I don't agree with this, and give us your feedback. We would love to hear from you, because as you've heard, we are going to do a study session in the middle of June. I believe it's June 15th with the board of directors. And what we would absolutely love to be able to share with them is some of the feedback from you as well, that we've been working with you guys on this project. You've seen how this evolves. tell us what you think of how we're synthesizing all the results here at the end. So you'll see that here in the next day or so, and we would love your feedback on it. And as always, we are open to just emails and thoughts and phone calls, and you guys have always been great about just sort of sharing with us. So if this is something you'd like to sit down on any aspect of this, we'd be happy to set up a separate meeting as well. So really appreciate that. Holly, do you want to go to the next slide? So to sort of next steps, wrap us up here, looking at our schedule. One more slide, if you don't mind, Holly. I know Holly's taking some good notes. This is good. So as we talked about, June 15th is our board study session. We are very excited because I think we have most of the meetings. So it's going to be a great discussion with the board. Then we're going to come back in with you guys at the end of June. We'll be able to share our conversation with the board, get into a little bit more detail on some of the financial scenarios we talked about. And then in July, that is when we will actually be going formally to the board to request approval of the final SOP, as well as, to Audrey's point, we will have some discussions around, what we're doing with mobility plan for the future. Is it being submitted or is it being approved? And then we'll wrap up and we'll do a final meeting here in August. We'll really kind of set the stage. The way we're seeing the mobility plan for the future is it's going to have a lot of policy recommendations. In a way, it's the beginning of a journey. So it's the beginning of a lot of decisions that the RTD board is going to have to make and the region's going to have to make moving forward to decide, especially related to some of the financial scenarios. So very excited about this, really hope that you see a lot of your work, your good work and your good time and effort reflected in some of the results that we have here. But if you don't, please reach out to us because we want to make sure that we have captured everything. So with that, I'll open it up. We've got a couple more minutes. If there's any other thoughts, questions, suggestions, good jokes, anything else you guys have, let us know. Let us know your thoughts. Or we can give you 10 minutes of your day back. I guess it's 9 now, but anything else? All right. Well, with that, we will say thank you. Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Get your snow suits out because apparently we have a winter storm coming tomorrow. And then, like I said, take a look out for the SurveyMonkey and the updated slides that will be sitting out here very shortly.
And thanks everybody for participating and hanging in there the whole almost 2.5 hours. So this was
my gosh,
great feedback, great dialogue, and like more to come. And again, look forward to your further input.
Yeah, really, really great conversation today. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.